Hello, this is Robert Cameron Weir. I'm chair of the Publications Committee for the New Hampshire Society of Genealogists, and welcome to our online supplement, a review of the New Hampshire Genealogical Record, Volume 32, Number 1. And I'm joined here by my co-conspirators. Here we see Ruth Craig. Why don't you say hi? You're our editor. And also Margaret Hodges of the Publications Committee. Hi, Margaret.
Hi.
And you see here our cover. This is sent to the printer. It'll hopefully soon be in your inbox soon, or your email inbox if you're getting our digital version. One thing you might notice different about this is this little icon here. This icon, which will appear 4 or 5 spots in the issue, denotes a link that you can click on in the PDF version of the issue, and that will take you to our online supplement videos. Presumably the reason why you're here is you've clicked on this link already, so I won't click it again, or you'll just restart this video all over again. This is going to be a thematic issue. As you can see, its editor's overview focus on infectious diseases and epidemics. And each of these articles, in one way or another, is going to touch on that theme. So why don't we get into the issue a little bit? Next page. President's introduction. And the one thing Diane wanted to make sure we noted here is we have a new editor, Ruth Craig. Ruth, could you just say a few words about yourself?
Well, I came from actually a disease-oriented background. I was a professor at Dartmouth, and now I'm an emeritus professor. And in that transition, I decided to go for certifications. Now I get to be the editor of the New Hampshire Genealogical Record. It's so exciting to me. I can't wait to continue. And it's the committee, the Publications Committee is just super to work with. So I'm very excited about doing this work.
Well, so cool that we're able to bring together both genealogy and your health sciences background into the same thing, the first issue. It won't always happen that way, I think.
Excuse me, but the same skills that are involved in medical research are involved in genealogical research. So I don't see, it's totally seamless to me.
Really? Though
yeah, of course. Putting together fragmentary evidence.
Okay, but the more dead people that I find, the better job I've been doing.
True. Actually, I worked on cell death. That's what my research was on.
Okay, very good. We're also talking, this is the thematic issue on epidemics in infectious diseases. Not every issue we do going forward will be a thematic issue, but we're talking about doing some additional ones going into the forward, into the future. And I think we're looking at, as it says here, New Hampshireites of Irish, Scots-Irish, African-American origin. And I think the next one we were talking about, what was it, like in 2021, an issue, French-Canadian?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a good chance of anyone out there who's been researching a French-Canadian family in New Hampshire, maybe someone in your own family, part of your own family tree, think about getting it written up and submitted for something for us to look at in the next 6 to 12 months. That would be great. Let's see.
And if you need help in French.
Oh, really? You can help with, oh, that would be awesome.
I speak French, yeah.
One thing you have here is this, Ruth, and your editor's intro I thought was fun, was this quote of kind of Mr. New Hampshire himself, Daniel Webster.
Yeah, actually you pointed me in that direction. And I live right up the street from Daniel Webster's cottage, but I had never read Daniel Webster. And wow, it's profound. It is profound. It's a little hard to read, but it is profound. It is still applicable today about commitment to democracy.
And I saw the quote and I thought it was about disease, but he's really just talking about consumption as a metaphor.
It's really a metaphor for what happens if the people are, we are so lucky to live in a democracy. He was talking in 1805, so it wasn't that many years. And there's so many places in the world where it wasn't the case that people got to have a say in things, and how precious it is and how much work it takes, or
Yeah.
otherwise it will die. But you should read him yourself, because it's a little bit hard to encapsulate in a few sentences.
And something that's always been interesting to me, I think it's hard to be a good genealogist without becoming a better historian at the same time, being more aware of our own history, or the history of, the countries that our ancestors came from. It's
yeah, that's what's so much fun. It's sort of like always new things to learn, because about history, about New Hampshire.
And I'll just toss it out. I mean, one thing we don't have in this issue, but we'd like to have in future issues possibly, would be book reviews, which could be on, historical things related to New Hampshire, genealogical, methodological. Keep in mind out there, if you have something that you've read recently that you thought would be of interest to genealogists in New Hampshire, contact us. Consider writing it up for a 1 or 2 page book review. Moving along to page 3, this is John Abbott of Candia, New Hampshire, followed his 7 children to the grave. An online video as well that accompanies this, if you're interested. This is something that actually came out of some of my client research, the family of a client. And I just found someone who was in the family who didn't seem to have any relatives. It's like I'm looking on one side of his family, there seemed to be no uncles, no aunts, nothing. And it got really puzzled me until I finally came across a newspaper article from 1861 that explained that this pretty much all his aunts and uncles, all the children of this one family were wiped out, and bad case of diphtheria that just hit this these 2 families, one extended family, two households, back in 1861 in Candia. So this is a short article, mainly a transcription of some vital records that speak to that.
Very hard to imagine losing 7 children. Losing 1 child is unfathomable.
Yeah, and it's hard to. I never really got a good feel for how the family felt, because they don't. Back then, even when someone leaves a journal, they tend to be not so effusive of their emotions. Maybe by 1861, but you see some earlier stuff where 1700, someone says July 1st got me a wife, August 23rd buried wife, and then the rest are commercial accounts. I mean, we've all seen that. Okay.
One thing, Rob, in the video that accompanies this text, I think one of the things that is so interesting is that you were able to hypothesize on how the disease spread among the family based on who went first, who died first, and who died second. And you were able to posit some pretty solid ideas of the social activity and the physical movement back and forth between the 2 households that led to this disease spreading.
Right, thinking of it as kind of a timeline, and figuring out who's the patient number 0 and how might it have spread. Because we're talking about an area or a time period before really a solid germ theory of infection. And you read even the texts of the time where they talk about diphtheria, they know it's a disease, they know people catch it, but they are unsure whether it's passed by person to person. If it is passed by person to person, they dispute whether it's in the air, whether it's by shared drinking and eating utensils, exactly what happens. And that's even the professional physicians are unsure of what's happening. You can imagine, a farm household in rural New Hampshire, their knowledge of medicine would have been, relatively medieval compared to, what we know today, what every person knows today. Then we get into page 5, our kind of central piece for this issue, the Lowe family of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, descendants of Joseph Ford Lowe of Essex County, Massachusetts. Ted Steele's work here. This is actually a continuation of a genealogy where the first, 3 generations are to be printed, or maybe have already are out there. I don't know. I know it's scheduled to be printed in the New England Historical Genealogical Register in the summer 2020 issue, and the fall 2020 issue continued. This continues off, and you can kind of see in this family tree here, it's really dealing with Joseph IV through Joseph V, and then through several of Joseph V's sons.
And I think our decision to include both diagrams and images in this volume really adds, I think, to the reader's ability to kind of envision things and comprehend things in a larger perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting set of research he's done here. It's a family in Portsmouth. A lot of this intersects with the revolutionary and pre-revolutionary era. A lot of it deals with men who were mariners, captains, merchants. A lot of the research Ted Steele was able to find additional information, things like, ship registers of the District of Gloucester. So a lot of maritime research, newspaper research. And Margaret, as you were saying, we have here some maps that you found at the Library of Congress website. If you're looking at the print issue, this will be black and white, but if you look at the digital issue, you'll get the full color version of the maps.
Including the ominous orange cast where the city burned in 1813.
Well, that's the part destroyed by, and then off the edge it would say destroyed by the fire. That's a marvelous map.
Yes.
That's more or less central Portsmouth, right, Peggy?
Yes, yes, it is.
Because I saw that the courthouse, which I think was the old site of the old state house at the time,
and since Portsmouth was the New Hampshire's largest seaport, and at that particular time, the late 18th to the early 19th century, Portsmouth was really in its heyday as a maritime center. It's very well documented by maps across, for basically over 100 years. So it becomes, I think that there are about seven maps that I know of, dating from 1770 through 1876. And they, as a body, they really allow you to see how the city changed, and the relationship of that people had within the city, their physical relationships to where they lived, where they worked, where their associates were, where their family members were, where they were buried, where they worshipped, and how that changed over time.
And I love in the article also just the mentions of the family and their maritime connections. This one, Joseph Sevenlow, Joseph Jr., talking about traffic on the brig Dolphin, offering freighter passage to the West Indies, which we'd call that the Caribbean today. And what struck me is just my own family history seemed to be people who came over in the 1630s and 1640s and settled in Massachusetts and essentially stayed there for 300 years. And most of them never seem to have left their hometowns or counties, except maybe during the Civil War, and that was it. They kind of stayed where they were for 300 years. And I imagine in Portsmouth, there were a lot of families that were like that too, or a lot of individuals who they grew up and they stayed in the county, in the area, maybe once a year if they were lucky, maybe they made a venture to Boston or something like that. But then living with them in the same town, they'd be meeting sailors, captains that had been to Africa, that had been to Spain and Portugal, that had been to the Caribbean, and just a kind of a weird mix of experiences that were vastly different. I mean, you think of the guy telling the tall tales of all his voyages. Well, half those tall tales could have been true from what you would have done. Yeah, John Lowe became master of the brig Elizabeth at the age of 21 in 1817, and for the next half dozen years he made repeated voyages to the West Indies with Joseph Seven. Sailed from New York to Haiti, never heard of again, 42.
Yeah. It's a lot of early deaths, not just due to infectious diseases and epidemics, but a lot maritime or childbirth or young children. There's one branch of the family where only 3 out of 11 or 12 children made it beyond age 20. It's just thinking our ancestors had to live with this. We think this is so just unbelievably horrible. This was more or less the norm for them.
Yeah, I mean, on the evening news every night for the last 3 months, we hear the weather report of what's happened in the Caribbean, and here's the storms, and here's their names, and here's their projected paths, and here's the cone of uncertainty, and here's the spaghetti models, and all this other stuff, because we have satellites in the air, and all sorts of information. Back then, I mean, your knowledge of what you were sailing out to was pretty much, red in the morning, sailors take warning. You don't know what you're going into, so it was much more perilous. Okay, now page 37. This is one, Ruth, that you're a co-author on, an epidemic in Hanover, New Hampshire in 1797. So around kind of overlapping with the time period of the Lowe article, but this one on the other side of the state in Hanover. So what went on there?
Well, this is part of a huge project that I have been doing with undergrads, where we're trying to get all of the death records of Hanover into documents that we can manipulate, that is, Word files, Excel files, searchable files, etc. And this first author of this paper, Alessandra Ledoux, was a student of mine about probably at least 3 years ago. She just completed her master's in public health. She wanted to transcribe the official death records begin in around the 1890 or so, at this town clerk's. But there is an earlier notebook that was kept by a resident of Hanover who was very observant, and for some reason very interested in causes of death. That's what we're interested in, and what did people die of throughout the ages in Hanover. So she was transcribing this very scratchy, scrawly, old, faded notebook that's available at the Special Collections Library. And we transcribed and we re-looked back and try to get everything as accurate as possible. And then kind of after the fact, I said, okay, epidemics. We had an epidemic in Hanover of dysentery. So in this article, we went through and we pulled out all the 1797 deaths. And it talks about, all 4 people in one family died in about 5 weeks.
Holden's, yeah.
Several persons were sick with other complaints, and this set in with the epidemic, and that destroyed them. And so it's reminiscent of today, where the flu, or if you have other comorbidities, you have the chances of a flu or an epidemic causing your death is increased. So there's so many parallels to our ancestors, makes us feel more close, I think, to the kinds of tragedies that they had to experience.
Indeed. I love the comments. So he's giving names, he's giving age in some cases, cause of death, which is encoded with abbreviations. and then often gives them just interesting comments about, this is a time period before they had professional undertakers. The funeral was arranged through the church and through the family. So he's giving some of the logistics of what had to happen within the town if you had a lot of deaths at once. Again, we carried one to the grave and escorted the mourners back to their dwellings, taking along with us the bier covered with the grave cloth, and hastened from thence to another house to perform the same duty to another deceased person. So they don't have enough, biers, the scaffold that you'd put the casket on, the mort cloth on top. They don't have enough equipment to do all these funerals at once. They have to essentially rush from one house to another after each funeral to continue with the next one, which is just an image of what it was like. Okay, then a little just short note of, I guess this is more of an optimistic one. Not every infectious disease condemned our ancestors to death. This is the kind of detail you can get about the times by looking at resources that not everyone looks at. In this case, looking at town annual reports, published by the towns in New Hampshire, and a lot of them are up at the UNH Digital Library at the link here. And this is one from Barnstead in report for 1954 annual report, the report of the school nurse, talking about the inoculation that they were starting at that time for polio, the first year that they were trying the Salk vaccine. So that's nice to see. When we start
it was a terrible disease. I actually, one of my clients, there was a baby who had died in a polio epidemic in New York City that nobody in the family had ever known about. Just losing a baby to polio. We take it for granted that we won't get polio these days, but
I interviewed my mother-in-law, kind of getting her oral history, and she's born 1928, and talked about it. It was a very real fear that people had at the time, because it would come on suddenly, it would strike down children without much notice, and it was that lingering fear of spend the rest of your life in an iron lung, and because it wasn't really much they could do if you did catch it.
Quarantine.
Okay, context epidemic. So when we have thematic issues, one of the things we'd like to start doing is having a context article. And a context article, as it says, highlights sources providing additional information about the theme of the issue. And it's something I think the Low article is a good example of it, and something we can learn about in our own write-ups when we write up our family history is, what do you do when you get to the earlier years where you don't have as much biographical detail, when you're limited to seemingly to facts of, born, married, died, and there's just kind of the bare bones of the genealogy. Well, context is something you can get from sources. In this case, we're talking about context that you can get from sources dealing with epidemics in New England. And I just traced through here the various major epidemics that happened in New England from the time the Pilgrims came over in 1620, the epidemic that they witnessed already taking place, through various epidemics, the throat distemper that happened in New England, including New Hampshire, a bill of mortality of the Dover Quakers in the 1700s, spotted fever epidemic, 1815, various things. This is a mixture of original sources, of how people were dealing with the disease and understanding the disease at the time. And it wasn't always medical science. A lot of times there was a religious explanation was given at the time for disease. So it's a mixture of first, primary sources, as well as more contemporary articles trying to figure out, well, what exactly was that throat distemper that happened in early New England? What was the actual underlying disease? So there's the secondary sources are more modern medical papers trying to interpret the symptoms from the past to try to figure out what diseases they were. takes it.
Excuse me. I think the context articles are a really wonderful body of resources that that writers and genealogists will want to know about, so that they too can develop context for the things that they are writing about as well.
True, true. I mean, it's one of the things that I didn't think about much until we the COVID epidemic started, but I went back to my own genealogy and said, well, who are all the people who my family tree, a lot of them were more extended family members, but who died in 1918? And then look up the cause of death, and it's like, wow, some of them died of influenza. And it's something that, if you just saw a death of something in isolation, you don't necessarily connect it to the big picture of what was going on. So I think, this is definitely worth something looking into, to see which of your family members were in these areas that had, the throat distemper, what was happening in your family in 1918, things like that. Maybe someday we revise this article and add a book about COVID. Next on page 47 is our advertisement from the Publications Committee. Much of New Hampshire genealogy remains unwritten. Will you help us write it? This is our call for papers. We encourage anyone who has a good story of a good work that they've done on their family history intersecting with New Hampshire to consider writing it up and sending it to us for possible inclusion in a future issue of the New Hampshire Genealogical Record. There's a video that goes with this that has nothing to do with the call for papers, other than it's really an investigation of this young girl here and what her backstory is. You might enjoy taking a look at that. But for the details, submission guidelines and editorial focus are on the backside of that, page 48. We seek well-written articles, research articles on individuals and families with connection to New Hampshire, including family genealogies, 2 or more generations, articles addressing genealogical questions such as questions of parentage or identity, and transcriptions and abstracts of records that are of genealogical interest and difficult to access or decipher. Along with some other things, we talked about book reviews, etc. If you have anything, if you just want to talk about an idea, or you have something already drafted, that's our email address here. We'd love to hear from you. Please keep us busy, right? And then we're off to our back cover. Just reminding you that a digital version of the NH record is available to members. Up at the website, you log in and you'll see a page there that has copies of the NH record. And if you have that digital version, the PDF version, you can click on links and get additional online supplements.
It's full of goodies.
Pardon?
It's full of goodies.
Full of goodies, full of extras. It's the secret toy surprise in the box of sorts. So I think, unless anyone else has anything to say, I think that's about it. I just say thank you for joining. Hopefully you'll follow our YouTube channel and you'll leave your comments below. This is Rob saying have a good one, and giving thanks from Ruth and Margaret. Bye.
You enjoy it.